Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. Pope Francis has died at the age of 88. The Vatican revealed that the late pontiff, who had been battling serious health issues, passed away in the Vatican at 7:35 this morning. Following the announcement of Pope Francis's death, tributes have been paid by many of the world's top leaders. Narendra Modi, Emmanuel Macron, Volodymyr Zelensky and Vladimir Putin are among those to share messages and pictures with the late pontiff. US Vice President Vance has begun his 4-day visit in India after arriving in Delhi earlier today. Joined by his wife Usha and their children, the US Vice President is scheduled to meet with Indian President Narendra Modi later this evening. Both Russia and Ukraine have accused the other nation of breaching a one-day Easter truce as reported strikes resume following its ending. Washington says it would welcome an extension of the truce amid diplomatic efforts over a ceasefire. Reports suggest US Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth has shared confidential details of a Yemen strike in a signal chat for a second time. Questions are growing over his use of an unsecured platform for classified information. Israel's military says that professional failings were found in a review on the killings of Gaza paramedics and rescue workers on March the 23rd. The military said that a commanding officer is to be reprimanded as a result. China has warned countries against striking a broader economic deal with the United States at its expense. This rhetoric continues an escalation in tensions over a trade war between the world's two largest economies. El Salvador's President Nayib Bukele has proposed an exchange of 252 deported Venezuelans imprisoned in his country for political prisoners. The US has praised his proposal. We start with our top story today, and Pope Francis has passed away at the age of 88, as confirmed by the Vatican. The Bishop of Rome and head of the Catholic Church, Pope Francis, became pontiff in 2013 following the resignation of his predecessor, Benedict. Cardinal Farrell announced the sad news in a statement saying, "Dearest brothers and sisters, with deep sorrow I must announce the death of our Holy Father Francis." Let's listen in to what Cardinal Kevin Farrell has said.
Carissimi fratelli e sorelle, con profondo dolore devo annunciare la morte del nostro Santo Padre Francesco. Alle ore 7:35 di questa mattina, il Vescovo di Roma Francesco è tornato alla casa del Padre. La sua vita tutta intera è stata dedicata al servizio del Signore e della sua Chiesa. Ci ha insegnato a vivere i valori del Vangelo con fedeltà, coraggio e amore universale, in modo particolare a favore dei più poveri ed emarginati. Con immensa gratitudine per il suo esempio di vero discepolo del Signore Gesù, raccomandiamo l'anima del Papa Francesco all'infinito amore misericordioso di Dio uno e trino.
Well, the Vatican flag is lowered on the Latin Patriarchate headquarters in the old city of Jerusalem. Meanwhile, Pope Francis's body will be placed in a coffin at the St. Martha Residence Chapel at 8 p.m. local time. Cardinal Kevin Farrell will lead the rites confirming his death, the Vatican has announced. Tributes are pouring in from world leaders following the death of Pope Francis. Archbishop of York, Stephen Cottrell, praised Pope Francis for his desire to lead and build the church in new ways and his service of the poor, noting his deep awareness of divisions between churches and their impact on faith. Italy's Prime Minister, Giorgia Meloni, called him a great man. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron praised his commitment to justice, and the vulnerable Dutch Prime Minister Dick Schoof described him as a man of the people, while EU Parliament President Roberta Metsola said his smile captured hearts worldwide. Israeli President Isaac Herzog honoured his boundless compassion, while Swiss President Karin Keller-Sutter called him a tireless advocate for peace. And Scotland's First Minister John Swinney remembered him as a voice for peace, tolerance and reconciliation. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky mourned Pope Francis's death, saying he prayed for peace in Ukraine and for Ukrainians. He added, "We grieve with Catholics and all Christians." Let's listen in to what some leaders have said.
N'est plus, et je voulais ici dire toute la tristesse qui est la nôtre dans ce moment et la grande douleur, je le sais, qui est partagée par beaucoup en France, mais à travers la planète. Je veux adresser avant toute chose mes condoléances les plus sincères à l'ensemble des catholiques du monde entier, leur dire notre soutien, dire aussi la place toute particulière qui était la sienne dans notre cœur et à nos côtés. Il était avec nous en Corse il y a encore quelques semaines. Il avait été à nos côtés à Marseille il y a plusieurs mois et il a marqué durant son pontificat la France de plusieurs passages ainsi, avec cette carte sensible. Il a durant tout son pontificat été aux côtés des plus vulnérables, des plus fragiles, avec beaucoup d'humilité et un sens tout particulier dans ces temps de guerre et de brutalité, un sens tout particulier de l'autre, oui, et du plus fragile. Et en cela, il a été fidèle à une tradition qui lui était chère.
میکنم به همه مسیحیان جهان و همه موحدین و پیروان ادیان آسمانی درگذشت پاپ فرانسیس رو از خداوند بزرگ برای ایشون طلب آرامش میکنیم.
Well, Spain will observe 3 days of mourning to honour Pope Francis following his death. Justice Minister Felix Bolaños announced he praised Francis's reformist papacy, highlighting his dedication to the weak, his fight against inequality and his advocacy for peace and climate action. Bolaños emphasised Spain's deep connection to his values and legacy, especially in defence of peace. Well, joining us to discuss this top story today is Rabbi David Rosen, a former Chief Rabbi of Ireland, who's joining us from Jerusalem. Rabbi David, thank you ever so much for joining us. Of course, your role within Judaism, a key one. We know that Pope Francis, of course, is somebody who has been celebrated for his work within the Catholic Church, but also outside of it, looking at peace, as mentioned there by world leaders, and his work for the poor. From your point of view, what made Pope Francis the man that is being celebrated today?
Thank you. One could actually say that no pope ever in history, perhaps since Peter, knew the Jewish community as well as Pope Francis did, and who had built up bonds and bridges of friendship and of mutual respect. When he was Cardinal of Buenos Aires, he had many friends across the different denominations within Judaism. He wrote a book with a rabbi. He visited the synagogue on Jewish festivals. He opened the cathedral's doors to commemorate the victims of the Shoah, of the Holocaust. And in fact, so many friends used to visit him in Rome that the chief rabbi of Rome used to say to me that it's actually in St. Peter's we need to open a new synagogue because there were so many visitors there at the time. So he had a very close relationship with the Jewish community, and continuing that of his predecessors, was a champion of combating anti-Semitism, which he said was incompatible with being a true Christian, and a sin against man and God. So he was a very special pope for the Jewish community. You know, he was the third to visit the synagogue in Rome, and I was privileged to be present. And it was like a family reunion. In fact, that was the language he spoke. He uses the term in terms of family coming together. And that was a hallmark of his papacy. It was all very, very personal, very connected. It was not something abstract or theoretical.
Yes, Rabbi David, of course, he focused on people and humanity with so many conflicts and areas of humanitarian crises ongoing. How did he push that forward?
Well, I would say probably as best he could, which was only in terms of articulating a moral voice. Some would actually criticize him that on certain conflicts he wasn't a little more forthright. For example, I don't recall that there was any condemnation of Russia's actual invasion of Ukraine. I think that very often the Vatican and Pope Francis, in this case, is reflecting that, feels the need to be able to maintain as much openness as possible for the possibility of acting as some form of interlocutor. But nevertheless, certainly as a voice of peace, condemning violence, that was very much part and parcel of his ministry, of his message.
Yes, and looking at the messages that have been coming in from every corner of the globe, we're showing some on screen now from Prime Minister Narendra Modi, also in Europe, North America, South America as well. The outcry and the messages have all been similar, celebrating him and his work. Why did he touch so many corners of the world?
We've referred to that. It was very much his humanity. He had very much the common touch that gave his papacy a kind of an accessibility, a familiarity for people. They could identify with him much more than with popes in the past. So there was also perhaps the possibilities of modern social media made him also even more accessible. So that accessibility, I think, really typified the man and his papacy.
Absolutely, and celebrating Pope Francis and his papacy, of course, people mourning now across the world, those who are Catholics, Christians and non-Catholics as well. Do you think that support will continue and those outcries will continue? And how will people remember him?
I think overwhelmingly they will remember him as the Pope of the people. And I think that will be his legacy. Human memories are very short. And while there is a strong identification with him at this time, a new Pope will come in who will assume a new style. And we tend to forget how remarkable John Paul II was for his time. He really sort of was a kind of a revolution for the church. But for young people today, they don't even remember that. So time marches on and change comes with it. And we will remember a very special Pope, but there will be new memories ahead for us.
Rabbi David Rosen, thank you ever so much for joining us and sharing your comments and memories of Pope Francis. Of course, as those tributes continue to come in, we will bring you all of those. We now move on, and US Vice President JD Vance has arrived in New Delhi for his first official visit to India after landing this morning with his wife Usha and their children. And a US delegation, Vice President Vance was given a formal guard of honour at the airport. This evening, Vance will meet Prime Minister Narendra Modi for crucial talks. The two leaders are expected to discuss a range of issues, including strengthening US-India ties and finalising the new Trust Partnership, which is a strategic collaboration on critical technologies. Following their discussions, Prime Minister Modi will host Vance and his delegation for dinner at his residence, with senior Indian cabinet ministers also in attendance. As both sides look to deepen cooperation, all eyes will be on any announcements that come out of this high-stakes meeting. Well, joining us to discuss JD Vance's first day in India and what we can expect over the next three is Prabhu Dayal, a former diplomat, joining us from New Delhi. Prabhu, thank you very much for being here. We've spoken there about a conversation that is going to take place with Prime Minister Narendra Modi and Vice President JD Vance later this evening. What do you expect will be discussed?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me on your show. The discussions between the US Vice President, Mr. JD Vance, and Prime Minister Modi are expected to pave the way for deeper cooperation in various sectors such as defense, technology, and trade. The Indian Foreign Ministry has put out a statement in which it has said that the visit will further deepen the India-US comprehensive global strategic partnership. Now, it cannot be overlooked that this visit comes amid President Donald Trump's aggressive trade moves, including a 26% reciprocal tariff on Indian goods as part of a broader tariff announcement affecting countries worldwide. Now, India has avoided a tit-for-tat approach as it could only lead to an escalation of disputes. Now, India does not want the tariff-related tensions to escalate, and that is why we started negotiations with the US to build a framework for a trade pact that would address issues relating to import duties and market access. Now, unlike many other countries, India did not impose counter tariffs on the US and focused instead on finalizing the bilateral trade agreement as quickly as possible. Significantly, India also tried to win over President Trump by slashing import duties on Harley-Davidson bikes and bourbon whiskey, because he had specifically mentioned these as items about which he felt concerned and on which India had imposed big tariffs. I may also mention that India also dropped a tax on digital services, which is known colloquially as the Google tax, and that was affecting US tech giants. So not only this, I think following talks between President Trump and Prime Minister Modi, India also agreed to buy more American goods, including crude oil, liquefied natural gas, and high-tech weapons platforms. And the idea was that this $47.7 billion trade surplus with the US should be reduced because this is what the US was wanting. So I repeat what I said. Instead of engaging in a harmful tariff war, India's objective has been to achieve a trade agreement which will benefit both sides and help to promote bilateral trade.
Yes, Prabhu, staying away from trade now and looking at the geopolitics of the world and the uncertainty, I want to look at obviously conflicts that are ongoing and the US involvement in many of those. What could be the outcome and what could be the benefit for either nations in such uncertain geopolitical times?
These global conflicts have not benefited the world at large. In fact, India has always emphasized that the world is one family, and that if a conflict breaks out in any part of the world, it is bound to affect other parts of the world. And in fact, this is what is happening. The effects of the Russia-Ukraine war and the Israel-Hamas war are percolating across the board, and they are affecting a whole host of other nations, particularly the least developed ones, which are termed as the global south. So India is very keen to see that this war, which is going on both between Russia and Ukraine, and the war which is taking place between Israel and Hamas, comes to an end as soon as possible. And this, in fact, is what President Trump has been emphasizing also. In fact, he was very hopeful of ending the war, but there are certain hurdles which have come up. But I understand that even now in his latest statements, he has expressed a lot of hope that the Russia-Ukraine war will come to an end. And at the same time, he is also doing whatever is possible in terms of diplomatic efforts to bring about an end to the Israel-Hamas war. But I must add that ending these wars is proving much more difficult than it was initially thought, because there are various aspects which have to be factored in, and they are becoming impediments.
Yes, absolutely, Prabhu. We are unfortunately running shorter on time, but I do want to discuss Usha Vance, of course, who is with JD Vance on this visit as well. The first Asian American second lady. What's the significance of JD Vance and Usha Vance coming to India, given her position now as the second lady of the United States and her Indian heritage?
Well, I must say that the media has been full of praise for various things, like the fact that President Vance's family dressed up in Indian attire, and that really caught the eye of people. It was an endearing gesture, and they went to visit the Akshardham temple. They will be going to Jaipur and also to Agra. So all this has emphasized the India connection, which is so dear to the US Vice President and his family. And there is no doubt about the fact that this closeness will also impact other aspects of the visit. And I'm sure that this will promote the ongoing closer relationship between India and the United States.
Prabhu Dayal, thank you ever so much for joining us, providing your insights as well. We will, of course, bring you all of those updates on JD Vance, Usha Vance and their children's visit to India over the coming days. We move now to the Middle East, and the Israeli military has revealed that professional failures were behind the killing of 15 paramedics and first responders in Gaza last month. The incident occurred during a convoy of Palestinian Red Crescent ambulances, a UN vehicle and a fire truck on March the 23rd. Israeli military has said that a commander would be dismissed over the incident. Gaza Civil Defense has accused the Israeli military of carrying out summary executions, rejecting the findings of the probe. The Palestine Red Crescent has also condemned the report as full of lies, demanding an independent inquiry by the United Nations. The incident has sparked global condemnation, with UN Human Rights Commissioner Volker Turk raising concerns about potential war crimes. Well, joining us to discuss this is Yossi Kupawasa, an Israeli intelligence and security expert who was joining us from Tel Aviv. Yossi, thank you ever so much for being here. We first have to look at this report, and it's saying that there were several professional failings, looking at individuals as opposed to a broader response from the Israeli military over these sort of incidents with medical vehicles moving forward. It has received some backlash, that is the report. How accurate do you think the report is, and can it be believed as the reality of the situation?
Well, it's a pretty painful report, because it reflects the fact that there were mistakes done by the people, the soldiers on the ground at the event, and that the reporting on what happened was not done properly. And this is all revealed in this report, and it's steps were taken against the people that were involved, including a relatively high-ranking officer. Yes, it's painful to see that. It shouldn't have happened. Unfortunately, it did happen, and we take the steps in order to learn the lessons and make sure that it doesn't happen again.
Yes, Yossi, of course there was condemnation at the time. There has now been condemnation over this incident following the report. Of course, the footage that was circulated at the time, found on somebody's phone. There's also, of course, reports that the bodies were buried in a shallow grave amid, of course, the devastation for Israeli families and also those living in Gaza due to the conditions from the ongoing fighting. Is this a isolated incident, do you think, in your opinion, or does this show a broader Israeli military strategy?
No, it's an isolated case. It's definitely an isolated case. We fight already for a year and a half. We attacked so many targets. The situation of war is always full of unclarity and ambiguity. And mistakes happen during wars, and they shouldn't happen, but they do. and we have to take this into account. It's an isolated case. When in this year and a half, we carried out so many attacks, and almost on none of them there was a question mark of whether they were conducted properly. And it's a difficult situation, of course, but it's not the way that Israel military operates. That's why it attracts so much attention, because it's such an extraordinary case.
Yes, Yossi, do you think this...
And we have to remember that even now, with all the mistakes that were carried out during the incident, 6 out of the 15 that were killed were terrorists. Amongst the paramedics, there were terrorists, and this makes the situation even more complicated.
Yes, Yossi, well that has been disputed by certain groups, but I want to look away from that, and I want to look at the response that might come from the IDF. Now, do you think that this incident and the fact that it's been played out on the global stage with condemnation from outside of the Middle East, do you think this will impact the way that the IDF carries out future military action within the Gaza Strip?
It will affect only in the sense that we should learn the lessons and not make the same mistakes, but it's not going to limit our determination to keep fighting and remove Hamas from power in Gaza and disarm Hamas and make sure that Gaza will not serve as a launching pad for terror attacks in the future. We have to do that in spite of some mistakes that happen along the way, and we have to correct the mistakes and keep fighting, and there's no other way for us. We have to release the hostages that Hamas still keeps in captivity, 59 of them, and we have to make sure that Hamas does not remain the power that controls Gaza in the future. Otherwise, we are going to have more 7th of October. We have to remember that all of that started with the atrocities, the horrific atrocities of 7th of October. And that's why we are at war. We were hoping to see some better relations between us and Gaza before 7th of October, but this dream has not materialized.
Yes, Yossi, to bring an end to this discussion, we are very short on time, but I do want to talk about the ongoing negotiations which have been taking place. Given the fact that recent ceasefire negotiations have failed, Hamas calling for a permanent end to the war, of course, Israel proposing ceasefire deals that have then been rejected very quickly. How do you think the next few weeks will play out amid conversations over ending this war that is hurting both sides?
Well, I believe that we are going to put more pressure on Hamas in the coming days and escalate our activities in the Gaza Strip so that Hamas will understand that by refusing to accept a deal, they actually bring more damage to their units and capabilities, and that the best way for them to move forward is to accept a deal that would bring about the release of more hostages and the release of more terrorists, by the way. It's in their interest. They want to release that terrorists from Israeli jails. That's what's going to happen if they are going to accept a deal. But and the conditions in Gaza are going to be improved considerably, because for the time being we prevent the entrance of humanitarian aid. Not that it affects so much the situation in Gaza so far, because they managed to get so much aid in the past that they are overwhelmed with the amount of aid that they have at their disposal. But in the long run, this might have an impact on them, and we hope that eventually they are going to accept some sort of a deal. And if not, we shall eventually will take over the Gaza Strip from their hands. If we are left with no other options.
Yes, Yossi Kupawasa, thank you ever so much for joining us and discussing the difficult and strained topic of the Israel-Hamas war. We will, of course, be across all of those developments, but that is all that we have time for. We'll continue to bring you more of the latest breaking news from across the world.